The cake knife was still in my hand when my wife leaned across the crowded living room and kissed another man. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't a joke. It was deliberate, slow, heavy, like she wanted everyone in the neighborhood to record it on their phones. For a second, I thought I'd dropped the knife because the floor shifted under me. But no, it was still in my grip, gleaming in the soft light of candles that had just been blown out by a chorus of people who thought they were celebrating me. My birthday, my house, my life, yet all of it suddenly belonged to someone else. The chatter died, replaced by a silence so sharp I could hear the fizz of champagne in glasses. Lila straightened her dress, pure white like she was mocking the word purity, and slipped her arm through Caleb's, our gym neighbor, the man whose handshake had always lingered too long, whose smirk I'd never trusted. She raised her glass high and announced in a voice trained to sound cheerful but laced with venom, "Everyone, I have a little announcement to make." The crowd froze, neighbors craning from the yard, co-workers exchanging confused glances, a few phones already raised, recording what they assumed would be a surprise toast. But the surprise wasn't balloons or candles or a heartfelt confession of love. It was betrayal wrapped in paperwork.
She kissed Caleb again, slower this time, as though sealing a contract, and then she slid a thick folder across the table toward me.
The papers landed on my plate right on top of the slice of cake I hadn't touched yet. Buttercream smeared the first page, but not enough to blur the bold words stamped across the top: petition for divorce. My breath caught as I flipped through pages filled with legal jargon I barely understood, but the highlighted lines made the message clear: emergency spousal support, immediate transfer of household possession, temporary restraining order. Everything planned, rehearsed, timed for tonight. "The house is mine tonight," she whispered through the smile she wore for the cameras, her voice a dagger aimed just for me. My confusion turned to disbelief when I saw the next page, an official-looking restraining order signed by a badge-carrying friend of hers standing smugly in the corner, arms crossed like he was part of her entertainment for the evening. My hands shook, the knife slipped, clattering against the plate, and the room spun as Caleb poured whiskey into one of my best glasses without even asking. Drank it like he'd been waiting for this moment, like he owned it. I couldn't breathe. Every eye in the room was on me, not with sympathy, but with morbid fascination, like they were witnessing a crime scene unravel in slow motion. Some guests whispered, some recorded, some pretended to look away, but no one moved to stop it. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, the front door creaked open and in walked Jonathan Harrow, my boss, CEO of Harrow Industries, the man whose word carried more weight in the city than any judge. His suit was dark gray, sharp enough to cut through tension, and his eyes colder than the winter air seeping in behind him. Conversations dropped into silence as he entered, guests parting instinctively like water making way for a storm. He didn't ask permission to step into my home, didn't look around for an explanation. He already knew. He walked straight through the chaos, unbothered by the stares, and placed a sealed envelope on the table with a firmness that silenced even the sound of my pounding heart. Then he looked at me, not with pity, not with confusion, but with certainty, as if he'd been expecting this exact moment. "Ethan," he said, his voice low and commanding enough that even the chatter outside stopped, "do not sign a single thing." The words weren't advice. They were an order, and in that instant, as my wife clung to Caleb like a prize she'd just won, and my so-called friends shifted uncomfortably under Harrow's gaze, I realized the party I thought was for me had transformed into something else entirely. My birthday had become the day my entire life was put on trial. The morning after my birthday felt like waking up inside a car wreck. You're alive, but nothing makes sense and every sound is too loud. My phone buzzed before I could even stand. The subject line glowing like a death sentence. Urgent. Suspension. Pending investigation into misappropriation of $380,000. I opened the email with trembling hands, my heart thundering in my chest, and what I saw nearly made me drop the phone. Screenshots of wire transfers, transaction logs, digital signatures, all stamped with my credentials. Proof that I had siphoned nearly $400,000 out of Harrow Industries accounts over the last 3 months. Only I hadn't. My login, my ID, my digital fingerprints were smeared all over the theft, but I had never touched those numbers. Panic spread like fire through my veins. Before I could even breathe, another call came in, this time Lila's lawyer. His voice was oily, smug, rehearsed. Mr. Miles, my client is filing today for temporary possession of the home and vehicles. Papers will be served by noon. I suggest you begin preparing your belongings. Preparing my belongings, as if I were already gone, erased, stripped out of my own life. My head rang with a siren that wouldn't shut off, then another voice cut through it, deeper, colder. Harrow. He didn't waste time with greetings. Office, now. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Within 30 minutes, I was in his black sedan, the city flashing by outside, the silence inside heavier than the leather seats. No music, no small talk, just the clicking of his jaw as he drove like every red light was a suggestion. I sat rigid, sweat prickling my back, my thoughts spiraling. If the company thought I'd stolen money, I wasn't just at risk of losing my job. I was facing prison. My wife had staged a public humiliation, her lawyer was moving to take my house, and now my boss, the man who controlled my future, was driving me God knows where. We arrived at headquarters. Harrow swiped us past security, down a hallway I'd never entered, into a room that felt like the spine of the building. Dark, cold, humming with surveillance monitors. He locked the door behind us. "Sit," he said, and I obeyed like a schoolboy waiting for punishment. He typed into a terminal, screens flickering to life, rows of footage cascading across the wall. Then he froze one video and enlarged it. My cubicle time-stamped 1:14 a.m., long after I'd gone home. The camera was grainy, but clear enough to show a hooded figure sitting at my computer, typing with purpose. "Watch," Harrow ordered. I leaned forward, heart hammering, and then my stomach dropped. The intruder's hood slipped back just enough to reveal his jawline, the cocky tilt of his head, the way his shoulders rolled. Caleb, my wife's lover, the man she had paraded in front of me like a trophy. He wasn't just in my home, in my bed. He had been in my office, in my life, forging my digital identity. Harrow tapped a key. We froze the keystroke data from that night. "Device fingerprints, not yours." He said it with a certainty that made my knees weak. Then, as if tearing open another wound, he pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and slid a photograph across the table. "This is where the money landed." A bank account summary, routing numbers, balances. I leaned closer, praying it would somehow be a mistake, a stranger's account, a random name. But when my eyes focused, the world tilted again. The account wasn't Caleb's. It wasn't some shadow company. The account was under Lila's maiden name. My wife's fingerprints were on the theft. She had engineered the scandal, coordinated the betrayal, stolen from the company, from me, from everything I had built. And she had planned it so cleanly that the trail pointed directly to me. My chest constricted. The walls seemed to close in, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. It wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just divorce. It was fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, a crime that could cage me while she walked away with everything. My mind replayed her smug whisper from last night. "The house is mine tonight." And I realized it wasn't just the house she wanted. It was the money, the cars, the reputation, my freedom, maybe even my future. Harrow's voice pulled me back, calm but sharp as glass. "They want you to panic, Ethan. They want you to fold." "Don't." His eyes locked on mine, unblinking. "But you need to understand, if she has the account, she has leverage. And leverage means she's not working alone." My hands trembled as I gripped the folder. "What do you mean, not alone?" Harrow leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable, but his silence was louder than any answer, because deep down I already knew. Lila was never smart enough to engineer this on her own. Caleb was muscle, not brains. This was bigger, a web, a setup months in the making, and I was the spider's prey, wrapped tight, seconds from suffocation. For the first time in my life, I saw not just the betrayal of a wife, but the blueprint of a conspiracy. And I realized the woman I had once promised to love was building her empire on the ruins of my life. The courthouse smelled of bleach and old paper, a place where truth was supposed to live, but where lies often dressed themselves in pearls and crocodile tears. And that morning, my wife wore both. Lila sat at the plaintiff's table, pearls glistening against her pale throat, mascara smudged just enough to look like grief. And every flick of her hand, every tremble of her lip, was theater rehearsed to perfection. Her lawyer stood beside her, sleek in his tailored suit, speaking words that sounded like gunshots aimed directly at me. "Ethan Miles is impulsive, controlling, and violent." He said it as if it were gospel, as if the past decade of my life could be boiled down to a headline of abuse. Then came the evidence, packaged like a horror story. Screenshots of text messages I had never sent, ugly threats written in my style, signed with my name. A broken lamp from our living room, photographed with careful angles to hide the fact it had been staged. And worst of all, a Ring doorbell clip projected on the courtroom screen, showing me storming into the house during an argument, my voice rising, Lila's tears flowing, and then cut to black just before I screamed the words, "Call 911." The abrupt ending turned me into a monster in the eyes of the court, because the missing seconds contained the part where I begged for help, not hurled violence. I could feel the judge's eyes on me, heavy, cautious, like he was already filing me under domestic abuser before I'd said a word. My attorney leaned close, whispering like a lifeline. "We asked Ring for cloud backups. If the deletion trail is there, it will show." My chest tightened as we refreshed the access logs on her tablet, and there it was, glowing like a scarlet letter. At 2:03 a.m., someone had accessed the account and deleted select clips. Not all of them, just the ones that mattered, the ones that could exonerate me. The timestamp was damning. The deletion hadn't come from my devices. It had come from inside the house. The evidence that condemned me had been trimmed like a movie trailer, edited by hands that wanted me ruined. The judge tapped his gavel, eyes narrowing, as if weighing whether to allow more time or deliver a verdict on the spot. Then the heavy wooden door at the back of the courtroom opened, and silence fell as Jonathan Harrow walked in with a man I didn't recognize. A forensic auditor with a laptop and the kind of face that looked allergic to lies. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Harrow wasn't just a CEO here. He was a storm wearing a suit, and when he entered, people moved aside as though the floor itself demanded it. He walked straight to the front, ignoring Lila's lawyer's protest, and handed the judge a flash drive. The auditor plugged it in, fingers flying across keys, and lines of data filled the courtroom screen. "Metadata recovered from the backup servers," he explained, his voice even but deadly precise. He zoomed in on the digital fingerprints, MAC addresses, keystroke cadences, login trails. The intruder used a laptop registered under the name Caleb R. Pierce. The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Caleb. My wife's lover. The same man she had kissed at my birthday party. The courtroom shifted, whispers snapping like firecrackers. Lila's hand shot to her bag, gripping the leather so tightly that it creaked like a confession begging to escape. For the first time, her eyes faltered. Not the eyes of a victim, but the eyes of someone who'd just been caught rehearsing a lie too many times. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled, gaze flicking between her and me with a sharpness that gave me a sliver of air to breathe again. He didn't clear me, not yet, but he didn't condemn me either. Instead, he set a hearing for the following week, his gavel echoing like a temporary stay of execution. As the crowd stirred, papers rustling, chairs scraping, Lila leaned toward me, her perfume sickly sweet, her whisper knife-sharp against my ear. "I'm pregnant. And you're not the father." The words detonated in my skull. I froze, my entire body turning to static as if the ground beneath me had collapsed. Pregnant. Not mine. A betrayal that cut deeper than bank accounts, deeper than forged evidence, deeper than lies in court. It was my life split open, my future rewritten in one sentence. My pulse roared in my ears, my vision blurred, and I couldn't tell if the courtroom was spinning or if it was just me collapsing under the weight of her cruelty. Before I could respond, Harrow's voice sliced through the fog, low enough for only me to hear. "We'll need a DNA test." "And Ethan—" He paused, his jaw clenched, his eyes unreadable, as though what he was about to say was heavier than everything we'd uncovered. "There's something else I haven't told you." His tone was final, deadly, promising that whatever came next would not just twist the knife in my chest, but drive it all the way through. And in that suspended second, as the gavel echoed again and the room emptied around us, I realized that the real trial hadn't even started. The sun had already slipped beneath the horizon when Harrow's car pulled into the industrial park, the kind of place that looked abandoned even when it wasn't. Rows of metal storage units stretching like prison cells under the orange haze of streetlights. He killed the engine without saying a word, his silence heavier than any lecture, and handed me a brass key stamped with the number 117. "You'll either forgive me for this," he muttered, his voice low, almost ashamed, or you'll hate me forever. My pulse quickened as we walked down the narrow aisle. Gravel crunching underfoot, each step echoing like we were walking into a grave. Unit 117 groaned as the lock gave way, and when the door rolled up, it wasn't empty. Inside, stacked like coffins, were banker boxes, towers of hard drives, file cabinets, and in the center, a single binder sitting on a steel table. The cover was stenciled in bold black, compliance, whistleblower. My breath caught in my throat as Harrow exhaled, his face suddenly lined with a decade of weight. Your wife filed an anonymous complaint months ago, he said, each word like a hammer, to tank you before your stock options vested. She wanted you ruined before you even realized you'd won. My hands shook as I opened the binder. Pages filled with damning details. Emails supposedly from me sent to competitors. My project deck forwarded from a burner account. Timestamps aligning perfectly with nights I was home asleep. Every document was poison. Every page proof that Lila hadn't just betrayed me. She had dismantled me piece by piece, starting long before the divorce papers landed in my birthday cake. But that was only the beginning. Another folder lay in the stack, labeled in neat block letters, social. I flipped it open and bile rose in my throat. A Reddit account stared back at me. Username, U Suburban Phoenix. Post after post, all spinning a nightmare version of my life. Titles that read like confessions, living with a secretly abusive husband. He smiles in public but screams at me at night. Each thread riddled with comments, sympathy pouring in from strangers who thought they were protecting a victim. And worse, photos. My kitchen, my living room, my garage. Pictures taken when I wasn't home, when I wasn't even in the state. My life had been broadcast to the world, rewritten into a villain's diary, a smear campaign so complete that if I'd stumbled across it without context, I might have believed it myself. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the posts, words that painted me as a monster. She hadn't just destroyed me in court. She'd built a digital noose and hung me on the internet for anyone to see. Harrow moved quietly to the corner of the unit, connecting a drive to a laptop he'd brought. He didn't speak until the screen lit up, and then he pressed play on a video that would change everything. The footage showed Caleb sitting at my desk late at night, the glow of my monitor lighting his face. He was calm, methodical, not a man breaking in, but a man who felt entitled to be there. Then a voice crackled through the speakerphone beside him, unmistakable, even muffled. Lila's. Her words were sharp, rehearsed, cold enough to make my skin crawl. Transfer it in 2 pushes, she instructed, like she'd done it 100 times. The rest hits my maiden account. By his birthday, he'll be out. I staggered back, my lungs forgetting how to move, my body forgetting how to exist. The sound of her voice, plotting my downfall like it was nothing more than a transaction, hollowed me out from the inside. I turned to Harrow. But for the first time since I'd known him, his eyes weren't stone, they were wet, glistening, as though he was carrying more than just corporate duty. His voice broke slightly as he admitted, I planned to fire you last month. I had the paperwork ready. I thought you were sloppy. I thought you were compromised. Until my PI found this. He gestured to the screen, to the proof that the betrayal wasn't mine but hers. My voice cracked as I asked the only question that mattered. Why? Why were you investigating me at all? Why dig this deep? For a long moment, Harrow said nothing, staring at the concrete floor like it might swallow him. When he finally looked up, there was no armor in his gaze, no CEO composure, only a man unraveling. Because I've been watching you your whole life, Ethan, he said, and the way his voice cracked made my skin crawl with dread. And I needed to know you were nothing like me. The words hung between us like a blade, and in that echoing storage unit, surrounded by the bones of my betrayal, I realized the story wasn't just about Lila anymore. Harrow had secrets buried here too, secrets tied to me in ways I had never imagined. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know what came next. We sat on the frigid floor of Unit 117, surrounded by banker boxes that told the story of my downfall more clearly than my own memories could, the kind of scene that felt less like a storage locker and more like a mausoleum of everything I thought I knew. My life was packed away here, evidence and betrayal stacked neatly in cardboard graves I hadn't dug, and in the center of it all, Harrow, the man who had been my judge, jury, and now something more complicated. His breath was uneven when he finally spoke, his voice carrying both resignation and confession. I paid for this unit 26 years ago, he said quietly. almost as though he were speaking to the dust rather than to me. From one of the boxes, he pulled a single envelope, yellowed with age, the edges soft from decades of being handled in secret. He handed it to me with shaking hands, and as I unfolded the brittle paper, my pulse thundered against my temples. It was my mother's handwriting, instantly recognizable, though I hadn't seen it in decades. The letter was short, but it detonated inside me. Jonathan, if you ever decide to tell him gently. We were children when we made that mistake. I chose adoption so he could have a quiet life. He deserves better than you and me. The words blurred through tears I hadn't realized were falling. The world tilted again, but differently this time, not from betrayal, but from revelation. My boss wasn't just my boss. Jonathan Harrow, the man whose judgment had both crushed and saved me, was my biological father. The silence that followed was unbearable until he finally looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see a CEO or a storm in a suit. I saw a man drowning in decades of regret. I never showed up, he admitted, his voice raw. I sent money anonymously. I watched from a distance. When you joined my company, I thought, maybe this was my chance to finally do one thing right. Suddenly, all the puzzle pieces I had ignored slammed together like a car crash. The raise that had made no sense. The way he defended my messy work as if it were genius. The way he barged into my birthday party with authority that felt paternal instead of professional. He had always been there, just outside the frame, watching, calculating, failing to step forward until everything was burning down. He gestured to the drive stacked behind him. I couldn't save your mother, but I can save you. Before I could respond, the heavy door screeched open, light spilling in, and 2 detectives stepped into the unit, their no-nonsense faces cutting through the air like scalpels. Harrow moved with purpose now, as though he had been waiting for this precise moment, and handed them a folder thick with lethal precision. Bank logs, surveillance footage, Reddit posts, even call notes from the so-called pregnancy clinic. One detective flipped through the ultrasound Lila had flaunted as her trump card, frowning as he held it to the light. This is fake, he announced flatly. Clinic says she never came in. Image pulled from Pinterest 3 years ago. My heart detonated in silence. The world I thought I lived in was gone. Then the detectives stepped aside, and there they were, Lila and Caleb, framed in flashing red and blue from the patrol cars outside. Their faces weren't defiant now, only pale with the realization that the web they had spun had finally snapped back around them. The clink of handcuffs was louder than any applause I had ever heard. Wire fraud, evidence tampering, false reports, conspiracy. The charges rolled out like a shopping list of sins, and still, she didn't cry. Lila kept her chin high until, finally, her eyes locked with mine. No tears, no shame, just a smirk that carved across her lips like a blade. The look said it all. You were never supposed to be smart enough to find me. My throat burned, but my voice came steady for the first time in weeks. You forgot one thing, I told her, staring at the security camera mounted above us. You planned a party. I brought the candles. Every word we had said in this unit, every admission, every scheme, had been recorded in high definition. She laughed once, bitter, sharp as glass. You think you won? She spat. But Harrow cut in, his voice thunderous and unshakable. Ethan didn't just keep his job. The board approved my retirement this morning. He handed me one final envelope, its weight almost crushing in my palm. I recommended a successor months ago. The shares vest at midnight. My stomach knotted as I tore it open, my eyes scanning the words I could barely comprehend. My name, written under the title CEO Designate. For a moment I felt nothing, and then I felt everything. The boy I had been, broken and betrayed, collided with the man I had just become. I looked up at Lila one last time as the detectives led her and Caleb away, her voice slicing through the air like venom. You'll die alone! And maybe I almost believed her, until Harrow's hand, tentative and awkward, settled on my shoulder. He wasn't a perfect man. He wasn't even a good man. But in that moment, he was trying to be a father. No, he said softly, almost to himself. He'll learn how to live. Outside, the sirens faded into the night, and the suburban street I thought I knew stretched out under the same stars as before. The same houses, the same driveways, but none of it was the same. And as the cold air hit my face, I realized that birthdays aren't about candles or cake or even survival. Sometimes they're about burning down the lies you've lived under and walking out into a life you never expected. The candle flickered out, and with it, an empire quietly changed hands.